You ever wonder why we do the things we do? Why we have certain dreams or fears, or why sometimes it feels like we're our own worst enemy? Well, today we're going to take a journey deep, deep into the mind to explore one of the most foundational and, let's be honest, fascinating ideas in all of psychology: psychoanalytic theory. Let's dive in.
So here's what we're going to cover in this explainer. First, we'll get past the whole pop culture idea of the couch. Then, we'll get into the mind's inner conflict, discover the power of the unseen driver, the unconscious, and we'll look at our psychological shields. And finally, we'll talk about the path to insight that this theory lays out.
All right, first up, beyond the couch. I mean, when you hear psychoanalysis, what do you picture? Probably someone lying on a couch, talking about their mother, right? But the theory is so much richer than that stereotype. It was really the original depth psychology, designed to explore all the hidden parts of who we are.
To really get into it, let's start with a question I think we can all relate to. Why, oh why, do we sometimes act against our own best interests? We know we need to save money, but we splurge. We know we should get to bed early, but we binge that extra episode. Sound familiar? Well, psychoanalytic theory gives us a really powerful way to understand this very human struggle.
So what is it really? At its heart, psychoanalytic therapy isn't about some quick fix. No, this is a deep dive. It's all about three big things. First, gaining real insight into ourselves. Second, understanding our unconscious motivations. The things that are driving our behavior without us even realizing it. And finally, over time, the actual reconstruction of our personality.
And that focus on what's driving us, well, it leads us right to the core of the theory, the mind's inner conflict. Psychoanalysis suggests that our mind is kind of like a stage, and on that stage, there's this constant, dramatic negotiation going on between three very different characters.
So, let's meet the cast: the id, the ego, and the superego. And trust me, thinking of them as characters makes this whole thing so much easier to grasp. Each one has its own agenda, its own wants, its own rules, and they are almost never on the same page.
And what's so brilliant is how this table breaks down that conflict. First, you've got the id. It's pure instinct, running on the pleasure principle. It's basically a toddler screaming, "I want it, and I want it now!" Then, on the complete opposite end, you have the superego. This is your inner critic, your conscience, all about morals and what society says is right, telling you, nope, you can't have that, it's wrong. And stuck right in the middle, the poor ego, the great negotiator, just trying to find a realistic way to make the id happy without getting in trouble with the superego. So, what happens when that negotiation starts to fail? That feeling we all know, anxiety. According to this theory, anxiety isn't just some random feeling of dread. It's actually a critical signal. It's the alarm bell telling you the ego is losing its grip, and the battle between the id and superego is getting out of hand.
But that raises a big question, right? If this epic battle is happening all the time, why aren't we constantly aware of it? The answer brings us to what was maybe the most revolutionary idea of all: the unseen driver. The incredible power of the unconscious mind.
You've probably seen the iceberg metaphor, and for good reason. It's perfect for this. Everything we're aware of right now, our thoughts, our feelings, that's just the tiny little tip of the iceberg sticking out of the water. But below the surface, that's where the real action is. That huge, hidden mass is the unconscious, this massive reservoir of feelings, urges, and memories that are secretly steering the ship.
And a central idea here is that our past is never really past. It plays a huge role in shaping who we are today. All those early experiences, especially the ones we pushed down and forgot about, they don't just vanish. They're still in there, influencing our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions right now.
So, if the ego is constantly under attack from the id, the superego, and all these unconscious forces, how does it possibly survive? Well, it protects itself with these incredible psychological shields. The more formal name is ego defense mechanisms. These are the clever, unconscious little tricks the ego uses to keep the anxiety at bay.
Think of these as the ego's automatic survival kit. They're unconscious strategies that shield us from thoughts and feelings that are just too much to handle. They kick in without us even thinking about it. And look, they can be helpful in the short term, but there's a catch. If we rely on them too much, they can really start causing problems.
Let's look at a few of the big ones. First up, repression. This is like the foundation of all the others. It's the mind's classic shove-it-in-the-closet move. When a thought or a memory is too painful, the ego just pushes it down into the unconscious. Out of sight, out of mind,
or so it thinks.
Next up is denial. Now this one's a little different. It's not about pushing away a thought that's inside you, it's about refusing to see a reality that's right in front of you. Denial can definitely soften the blow of something traumatic, but if you lean on it too long, it stops you from ever actually dealing with the problem.
And then there's projection. This one is absolutely fascinating. It's like the psychological hot potato. The ego takes a feeling it doesn't like in itself, let's say intense anger, and just attributes it to someone else. So instead of thinking, wow, I'm really angry, you think, why is that person so angry with me? It's a seriously clever way to offload feelings you don't want to own. Okay, so if so much of what drives us is totally hidden and we have all these shields protecting it, how on earth do we ever gain any control? Well, that brings us to our final section, the path to insight. Because the entire goal of all of this is to make the unconscious conscious, to bring that hidden stuff out into the light.
And here's the game plan. It starts with something called free association, where you just talk about whatever comes into your head, no filter. The idea is to let clues from the unconscious slip out. Then, the therapist acts like a detective, helping with interpretation, connecting the dots, and figuring out the hidden meanings. And finally, and this is crucial, is the working through process. This isn't a quick fix. It's a long-term exploration that helps you really integrate these new insights and finally resolve those old conflicts.
And that pretty much brings us to the end of our journey today. Psychoanalytic theory, for all its controversy, really gave us a new language to talk about the hidden depths of our own minds, the inner conflicts, the clever defenses, and the unseen forces that drive us. So I'll leave you with a powerful question to chew on. What unconscious forces might be scripting your life story?
Today we're exploring Adlerian Therapy, and really it's all about this deep, fundamental human drive we all have to belong, to contribute, and to, find our place in the world. It's like a blueprint for understanding ourselves and how we connect with everyone around us. You know that nagging feeling you get sometimes? That feeling that you don't quite fit in, or that you're always trying so hard but just falling short? Well, if you've ever felt that, you're definitely not alone. It turns out these are totally universal human experiences, and Adlerian Therapy has a really cool way of looking at them, not as a weakness, but as the actual fuel for our growth.
Okay, let's really break this down, because this is the absolute core of the whole thing. Adler believed that those feelings of inferiority, of not being enough, aren't some problem we need to get rid of. Nope. He saw them as the engine. It's what motivates us to learn, to improve, to strive for something better. It's pretty much the spark that drives all human progress.
Now, to really get Adler, it helps to look at where he and his famous colleague, Sigmund Freud, parted ways. They were both pioneers, for sure, but Adler had this much more optimistic, forward-looking take on what makes us tick. He basically said, hey, we are not prisoners of our past.
And this comparison just lays it all out, doesn't it? Freud's view was that we're basically pushed through life by our past experiences and all these unconscious drives. But Adler, he came along and said, no, we are pulled by the future. We're pulled by our goals, our vision for who we want to be. It's a huge shift, right? It's the difference between feeling like your life is already determined and knowing that it's something you get to creatively build.
So, if we're pulled by our goals, how do we actually go after them? Well, Adler had a name for our own unique way of doing things. He called it our style of life. Just think of it like your personal, one-of-a-kind map for getting through the world. It's the blueprint you've created for yourself to overcome those feelings of inferiority and find where you belong.
And according to Adler, this personal blueprint gets put to the test in 3 main areas of life that we all have to deal with. First, there's the social task, building friendships. Then there's the task of finding love and intimacy. And finally, the occupational task of contributing to the world, of having a purpose. How we handle these 3 things says a lot about our style of life.
This brings us to a really beautiful and central idea in Adler's theory, social interest. This is our built-in capacity to connect with other people, to cooperate, and to genuinely care about their well-being. For Adler, this was everything. A healthy level of social interest isn't just nice to have. He saw it as the #1 sign of mental health. It's what takes us from feeling small and inferior to feeling connected and part of something bigger.
And wow, this quote from Adler, it just perfectly captures what he meant by social interest. To see with the eyes of another, to hear with the ears of another, to feel with the heart of another. It's just pure empathy. Adler truly believed that our own happiness is totally tied up in our ability to contribute to the lives of other people.
Okay, let's talk about a concept you've probably heard of before: birth order. Now, for Adlerians, this isn't about putting you in a rigid box. It's more about recognizing that the position you're born into in your family gives you a unique starting point, a specific perspective on the world. It gives us clues about how you learn to find your significance.
So you've got the oldest, who might become super dependable after being, dethroned by a younger sibling. Then the second child, who often acts like they're in a race with the first one. The middle child can sometimes feel a bit lost in the shuffle. The youngest, often the charmer of the family. And the only child is frequently a high achiever, but might have to work a little harder on sharing. But again, these are just starting points, not your destiny.
Now, another really crucial piece of our personal blueprint is what Adlerians call our private logic. Think of this as your personal internal rulebook. It's made up of all these deeply held beliefs you have about yourself, about other people, and about how the world works. This private logic is basically the compass that guides all of your actions.
This private logic is incredibly powerful, but when it's built on mistaken ideas, it can cause some real problems. Let's look at this case study of a client named Stan. His private logic goes something like this. Okay, I believe I'm unlovable, and I believe the world is full of people who will probably reject me. The logical conclusion for him? Therefore, I have to stay by myself to avoid getting hurt. See how it makes sense from his point of view, even though it's keeping him stuck?
And that leads us right into the therapy itself. The main goal here isn't to cure some kind of sickness. It's really about a journey from discouragement to encouragement. It's about helping someone find the courage to face life's challenges in a way that's more connected and, well, more courageous.
So this whole therapeutic journey generally unfolds in 4 stages. It all starts with building a solid, respectful relationship between the therapist and the client. Then, together, they dive in and assess the client's lifestyle. That leads to step 3, which is all about gaining insight and self-understanding. And finally, you get to reorientation. That's where the client takes all that new insight and starts to put it into action.
So in that second phase, the assessment part, the therapist kind of becomes a lifestyle investigator. They'll look at the family dynamics, birth order, and, this is really key, their client's earliest memories. Adlerians don't see these memories as simple facts from the past. They see them as a reflection of our core beliefs right now. It's our private logic on full display.
And to really get to the heart of what a memory means, a therapist might ask a question just like this one. That one single frame that stands out the most in the memory, that's usually where the gold is. It reveals so much about how the client sees life, what they were feeling, and the conclusions they drew from that moment.
Phase 3 is where all the dots start to connect. It's that big aha moment when the client finally sees the link between their hidden beliefs, their feelings, and their actions. They start to understand the purpose their behavior serves. So for Stan, he realizes his isolation isn't random. Its purpose is to protect him from the rejection he's so afraid of.
But, and this is so important, just having that insight isn't the end of the story. The final phase, reorientation, is all about action. It's about taking that new understanding and using it to make real changes. This is where you roll up your sleeves, take some risks, try new things, and actively start writing a new, more fulfilling chapter in your life.
Now, there is one single thing that weaves through all 4 of these phases. It's not just a technique, it's the most distinctive and important part of the whole approach, and that is encouragement. It's the fundamental vibe of the therapy, constantly working to build up the client's courage to be imperfect and to try again. So, what's the end game here? What is this whole process trying to achieve? It's about discovering a whole new way of living. It's about finally, truly finding your place.
By challenging that faulty private logic and drawing up a new life blueprint, people start to see themselves and the world in a completely new light. They shift away from just protecting themselves and feeling isolated, and they move toward real connection and a feeling of community. They start to develop that all-important social interest we talked about.
So if you take anything away from all of this, let it be these 4 things. 1. You are not defined by your past. You are pulled forward by your future. 2. Those feelings of not being good enough, they can actually be your greatest superpower for growth. 3. A sense of belonging isn't just a nice idea. It's essential for your well-being. And 4, and this is the big one, you have the power to reauthor your life story anytime you choose.
And that really just leaves us with one final question to think about for ourselves. What is the guiding purpose that's pulling you forward? What is this story that's shaping your life right now? And is it the one you truly want to be writing?
All right, welcome back. Today, we're diving into something pretty deep, existential therapy. Now hang on, because this isn't about diagnosing a condition or anything like that. Really, it's more like a guide, a framework for wrestling with those huge, fundamental questions that we all think about from time to time. You know the ones I'm talking about, right? Why are we even here? What's the point of it all? How am I supposed to find meaning when I know life is, well, finite? These questions can be pretty heavy and, honestly, a little scary. And that's exactly where existential therapy comes in. It doesn't pretend to have all the answers. Instead, it gives us the tools to explore the questions for ourselves. So, what are we really talking about here? Well, at its heart, it's a philosophical approach to therapy. It starts with this big idea: we are all free. And because we're free, we're also responsible for our own choices and our own lives. So the whole point isn't to cure something, but to really dig into what are often called the givens of life, the big, unavoidable truths, so you can start living a life that feels genuinely you. Okay, the pioneers, forged in fire. And that's what's so powerful about this whole approach. I mean, these ideas weren't born in some stuffy academic setting. No way. They came from intense, lived experience. Let's talk about one of the key figures behind it all. This quote comes from Viktor Frankl, and to understand its power, you have to know his story. Frankl was a psychiatrist who survived the Nazi concentration camps. I mean, just imagine, in the middle of the most horrific, unimaginable suffering, he discovered this incredible truth. He saw that you can take everything from a person, everything, but you can't take away their freedom to choose how they respond, their attitude. That's the one thing that's always yours. So out of this profound experience, Frankl developed something he called logotherapy. It literally translates to therapy through meaning. And this was a game changer. You see, back then, Freud was all about the will to pleasure, and another psychologist, Adler, was focused on the will to power. But Frankl said, no, you're both missing the main point. He believed the most powerful human drive, the thing that keeps us going, is our will to meaning. We have this deep, fundamental need for a purpose. All right, the core, the givens of life. These are the fundamental challenges we all have to face. So what does this philosophy really boil down to? Well, existential thinkers point to 4, let's call them givens of being human. These are the core anxieties that every single one of us has to deal with, whether we realize it or not. Okay, first up, and it's a big one, is the reality of death. The simple, unavoidable fact that our time here is limited. We're not going to live forever. And yeah, that awareness creates this sort of low-level anxiety for pretty much everyone. But here's the twist. It's not supposed to just be a downer. In fact, it can be the ultimate motivator. It's what can push us to live a really full life, right now. So we're basically faced with 2 choices here, right? On the one hand, you can kind of live in denial. Just act like you've got all the time in the world, live superficially, and put everything off. Or you can face it. You can accept that your time is finite. And when you do that, something amazing happens. It becomes this incredible catalyst. It lights a fire under you to stop messing around and actually build a meaningful life today. All right, the second big given is freedom. And I know what you're thinking. Freedom, that sounds great. But from an existential point of view, it's actually a burden, a heavy one. Philosophers call it radical freedom. It means there's no script. We are the authors of our own lives. And that sounds empowering, but it also means we're responsible for everything, every choice, every action. That's a lot of pressure. And this leads to a pretty wild paradox, doesn't it? We hate it when we don't have choices, but we get super anxious when we do. So what do? We try to escape. We try to dodge that responsibility by saying things like, oh, that's just how I am, as if we're some fixed, unchangeable thing. The goal of therapy here is to help us stop running and actually embrace that we're the ones in the driver's seat, that we absolutely have the power to change things. Okay, number 3 is the pain of isolation. And this one can feel a little harsh. It's this idea that, at the end of the day, we're fundamentally alone. We come into this world alone and we leave it alone. No matter how much we love someone, there's always this small gap between us. But, and this is a huge but, this isn't some tragic fate. It's actually the starting point for creating real, authentic relationships. Think about it like this. If you can't stand being by yourself, you're going to use other people to fill that empty space inside you. Your relationships become needy, clinging, almost desperate. But if you can learn to be okay on your own, to really have a strong relationship with yourself first,
Then you can connect with others from a place of strength, not weakness. You build relationships that add to your life instead of just plugging a hole.
And that brings us to our fourth and final given, the search for meaning, or more accurately, the challenge of meaninglessness. Frankl had a great term for the feeling this creates, the existential vacuum. It's that hollow, empty feeling you get when you wonder, what's the point? Because, let's face it, there's no instruction manual for life. We're thrown into this world and faced with this massive task of figuring out our own purpose. So here's the kicker. Meaning isn't something you just find one day, like you're on a treasure hunt. No, it's something you create. You build it, piece by piece. A big part of therapy is helping people sift through all the values they were handed, by their parents, by society, and figure out which ones actually fit. It's about designing a blueprint for living that is 100% your own. Okay. The process, the existential journey. So that's all the big picture theory. But what does this actually look like when you're in the room with a therapist? What happens? And this is probably the most important thing to understand about how it works. This isn't about a therapist using a bunch of fancy techniques on you. It's not a bag of tricks. The real magic, the thing that actually creates change, is the relationship itself, that genuine human connection between two people working together. There is a beautiful concept for this from the philosopher Martin Buber. He called it an I-thou relationship. It's all about a real, direct, and respectful connection. The therapist isn't some cold, distant expert looking down at you. They're more like a fellow traveler, right there with you, on your journey, exploring things together. So what's the goal of all this? Well, it's really about getting you to see things more clearly, to help you stop fooling yourself, to face your anxieties head on, and to take action. It's about inviting you to really think about your life, and maybe most importantly, to clear out all the stuff that's getting in the way of you living a life that actually feels meaningful. The takeaway, creating your meaning. All right, let's boil this all down. What's the bottom line here? What's the big idea from all of this that you can actually use in your own life, like right now? It really comes down to these four things. Number one, you are free, always. You get to choose how you act and what attitude you take. Two, with that freedom comes responsibility. You're in charge of building your own life. 3, meaning isn't out there waiting to be found. You create it through your choices and commitments. And 4, anxiety isn't the enemy. It's actually a signal. It's proof that you care, and it's a call to live even more fully. Viktor Frankl loved this quote from Nietzsche. He said it should be the motto for all therapy, and you can see why. He who has a why to live for can bear with almost anyhow. It just nails the whole idea, doesn't it? If you have a powerful reason to get up in the morning, a real purpose, a why, you can get through almost anything life throws at you, anyhow. And so that really leaves us with one final and I think crucial question. This whole thing isn't just some abstract theory, it's an invitation. So knowing that you're the one holding the pen, that you are the author of your life, what story are you going to write? So what if the real key to unlocking your potential isn't about getting advice from some expert, but it's actually about being truly, deeply heard? Well, today we're going to dive into something called person-centered therapy. It's an approach that completely shook up the world of psychology with one simple but incredibly powerful idea. I mean, really think about that for a second. We live in a world that is just full of people telling us what to do, how to think, how to feel. But what if the deepest, most profound wisdom about your own life, your challenges, and your path forward, what if all of that is already inside of you? You know, this idea, which was pretty radical at the time, came from a psychologist named Carl Rogers. Back in the mid-1900s, most therapy was about the therapist being the expert, digging into your past, and telling you what your problems were. But Rogers came along and said, hold on a second. He believed that every single person has this incredible built-in capacity for growth and healing. They just need the right kind of environment to let it bloom. Okay, so let's really unpack this because it's the whole foundation. Rogers loved to use this simple but really powerful metaphor. A seed. Think about it. A tiny acorn already has the complete blueprint to become a massive oak tree. You don't have to teach it how to be a tree. You don't have to fix it. You just have to give it the right conditions, right? Good soil, some water, and plenty of sunlight. Rogers gave this innate drive a name, the actualizing tendency. And this is the absolute core belief of person-centered therapy. It's this deeply optimistic view of humanity that says, hey, we are all hardwired to grow, to heal, and to become the best versions of ourselves. It means we're not just defined by our past mistakes. We're constantly moving toward our full potential. So that leads to the big question, right? If we all have this seed of growth inside of us, what's the therapeutic version of soil, water, and sunlight? What's the secret sauce that creates that perfect environment for us to flourish? Well, Rogers boiled it down to 3 essential conditions. And get this, Rogers didn't just say these were helpful, he claimed they were necessary and sufficient for change to happen. That's a huge claim. It means if a therapist can truly provide these 3 things, the client's own inner engine for growth will just naturally kick into gear. So let's break down what these actually mean. First up is congruence. It's kind of a fancy word, but it just means being genuine, being real. It means the therapist isn't hiding behind some professional blank slate facade. What they're feeling on the inside matches what they're showing on the outside. They're just there with you as another human being. And that authenticity gives you, the client, permission to be real too. The second ingredient is unconditional positive regard. Now, this is a big one. Can you imagine what it feels like to be completely accepted with no strings attached? No, I like you, but, or you'd be great if only. It's this deep, genuine caring that says, I accept you exactly as you are, right now. This creates this incredible sense of safety where you can finally let your guard down and look at the parts of yourself you've been too afraid or ashamed to face. And the third, final piece of the puzzle is accurate, empathic understanding. This is so much more than just saying, I hear you. It's a therapist's ability to really feel and sense your inner world, your joys, your fears, your unique way of seeing things, as if it were their own, but without losing that as if boundary. It's that profound, powerful feeling of being truly, deeply understood. So, what actually happens to a person when they're in this unique atmosphere of genuineness, total acceptance, and deep empathy, maybe for the first time in their entire life? Let's take a look at the journey they go on. It's pretty amazing. A lot of us start therapy feeling, well, a little lost. We're living our lives based on this constant chorus of shoulds and oughts that we've picked up from everyone around us. This creates this painful gap between our real, authentic self and the person we think we're supposed to be. And that gap, that's where all the anxiety, the defensiveness, and that feeling of not being good enough comes from. Now, the goal here isn't to fix anybody. The goal is to create that space for them to grow into what Rogers called a fully functioning person. And look, this isn't some perfect mythical being who has it all figured out. Not at all. It's just a person who is becoming more and more open to all of life, who trusts their own gut, and who lives more fully in the here and now. It's a process, a direction, not a destination you arrive at. And as this journey happens, this incredible transformation starts to take place. People become less defensive. They become more open to all of their experiences, the good and the bad. They stop looking outside for approval and start trusting their own internal compass. Basically, they start living a life that feels more real, more authentic, and they're excited to keep on growing. Now, the impact of these core ideas was so huge, it didn't just stop with Carl Rogers. They sent these incredible ripples all throughout the field of psychology, and they're still shaping many of the therapies we use today. So let's take a look at how this powerful legacy is still evolving. So, for example, Rogers' own daughter, Natalie Rogers, took these ideas and created something called expressive arts therapy. It uses things like painting, music, and movement to help people tap into feelings that words can't always reach. It's built on that same trust in our inner wisdom. And then you have something like motivational interviewing, which is a huge deal in addiction treatment and healthcare. It takes that core empathy and acceptance from Rogers, but it adds a slightly more directive style to help people work through their own mixed feelings and find their own motivation to change. All right, so why is this approach from way back in the mid-20th century still so important today? And, like any theory, what are its potential blind spots? It's really important to look at the whole picture here. On the plus side, its biggest contribution is probably how it put the therapeutic relationship front and center. It said the connection between two people is what heals, and now decades of research back that up across almost every type of therapy. It's also super adaptable to different cultures because it focuses on universal human needs. But on the flip side, some people feel it can be a little too non-directive. If someone is in a major crisis, they might need more structure and concrete tools right away. And honestly, for a new therapist, it can be really challenging. It's way easier to learn a set of techniques than it is to learn this authentic way of being with another person. And that really brings us to the main takeaway. Forget about therapy for a minute and just think about a relationship in your own life, with a partner, or a parent, a friend. What do you think might change if you tried to bring just a little more of these core conditions into it? A bit more genuine presence, a little more judgment-free acceptance, and a real effort to understand their world from their side. The potential you could unlock in that relationship, well, it might just surprise you.
Hey, welcome to our explainer. Today, we are diving into something called Gestalt Therapy. It's a really fascinating approach to psychology, and it's built on this one powerful idea. To really move forward in life, you first have to fully show up in the present.
I mean, does that sound familiar? It's a pretty common feeling, right? It's like you're scattered. One piece of you is still stuck replaying an argument from yesterday. Another piece is already stressing about a meeting next week, and there's almost nothing left of you to just be here, right now. Well, Gestalt Therapy has a name for this. It's called unfinished business. Think of it as all those unexpressed feelings from the past. You know, the resentment, the grief, the anger, that just kind of hang around. They're basically like emotional pop-up ads that keep hijacking your attention and pulling you out of the present moment.
Okay, so how do we close all of those emotional tabs that are slowing us down? That's really the question at the heart of Gestalt Therapy. It gives us a way to bring all those fragmented parts of ourselves together in the one place where we can actually do something about them. Right here in the now.
Now, the key word here is experiential. This isn't about sitting on a couch and just talking about your childhood. Nope. It's about bringing those feelings and situations to life, right there in the therapy session. The whole focus shifts from asking, why do I feel this way, to what am I feeling and how am I feeling it, in my body, right this second.
And the name itself is a huge clue. Gestalt is a German word that means whole or complete. So the entire goal of the therapy is to help you find those missing or disconnected pieces and integrate them so you can feel more whole, more complete as a person.
So this whole approach is built on a few really powerful core ideas. Let's dig into the building blocks that make Gestalt therapy actually work.
Think about what's happening for you right now. You're listening to my voice, you're looking at this slide. That's the figure. It's what's in focus. But what about the feeling of the chair you're sitting in or the temperature of the room? That's all on the ground. A healthy person, according to Gestalt theory, can easily shift their focus to whatever is most important in any given moment.
And that brings us to the absolute core of this therapy, awareness. See, in Gestalt therapy, awareness isn't just a side effect or tool to get somewhere else. Awareness is the goal. The whole idea is that by becoming more aware of what we're feeling and doing in the here and now, we start to see our own patterns, and that's what gives us the power to change them.
So our problems often start when we resist really making contact with what's true for us. And here are two big ways we do that. First, there's introjection. This is basically swallowing someone else's beliefs or values whole, without ever stopping to think, hey, is this actually true for me? And then, because of that, we often fall into avoidance, where we do everything we can to not face the unfinished business that these borrowed beliefs create.
Okay, theory is great, but what does this actually look like in a real therapy session? To make this all a bit more concrete, let's take a look at the case of Stan, which the source material uses to really bring these ideas to life.
So the process isn't really about digging up the past just for the sake of it. It's about bringing that unfinished business right into the present moment where you can finally work with it. The real goal is to help you see those old coping strategies, those creative adjustments you made as a kid to survive, and recognize that maybe, just maybe, they're not working for you anymore as an adult.
So this is Stan, and Stan is going through it. He feels totally inadequate, especially with women. He has a lot of anxiety, and he tends to drink pretty heavily when things get overwhelming. He's basically carrying this huge, heavy backpack filled with beliefs he just accepted from his family and society without ever questioning them.
And here's one of the heaviest things in that backpack, this core belief that Stan has swallowed whole. This is a perfect and really painful example of an introjection. You can just feel that this isn't his own authentic voice. It's a toxic message he internalized a long time ago, and it's been running his life ever since.
And this is where the doing part of the therapy comes in. Instead of just talking about this critical voice, a therapist might suggest an experiment, like the famous empty chair technique. Stan would literally be asked to imagine that critical part of him sitting in an empty chair across from him. He'd talk to it, yell at it, and then, this is the cool part, he'd switch chairs and speak as that critical voice. The goal isn't a magical cure, but to make Stan powerfully aware of this battle happening inside him.
So as you can see, this is about so much more than just fixing one problem or challenging one negative thought. The real destination of Gestalt therapy is much bigger. It's about a fundamental shift toward living a more authentic, aware, and responsible life.
And when you look at what Gestalt therapy brought to the table, you can see why it was such a game changer. It moved us past just talking and started paying attention to body language, to dreams, to the whole person. It really reframed therapy, not as some cold mechanical procedure, but as a living, creative encounter between two people, where real change can happen.
So let's bring it all back home, right here to you, in this moment. Gestalt therapy really just invites us to ask a simple but powerful question. What are you pushing away? What piece of unfinished business, what feeling are you ignoring that's just waiting in the ground of your experience, ready for you to finally notice it? That's a question worth sitting with.
So, what if you could change a lifelong fear or maybe just a really annoying bad habit, not by digging deep into your past, but just by changing what you do? Well, that is the big promise of one of psychology's most practical approaches, behavior therapy. It's less about what you think or feel and all about what you actually do. Think about something you're afraid of for a second. Come on, we all have one. Maybe it's public speaking, maybe it's spiders, whatever. We tend to think of fear as this big, abstract thing that just lives in our minds, right? Something we just have to put up with. But what if that's not the whole story? What if fear or anxiety or a ton of other challenges we face are actually learned behaviors, things we picked up along the way? And if they were learned, well, that means they can be unlearned. That powerful idea is the beating heart of behavior therapy. So let's dive in and figure out what exactly this is all about. Okay, so what is behavior therapy really? What makes it so different from, the classic image of lying on a couch talking about your childhood? Well, for starters, it's all about the here and now. Instead of spending years digging into the past, behavior therapy looks at what's happening today, what triggers a certain behavior and what keeps it going. The whole focus is on creating new learning experiences that can lead to real, tangible change. And these characteristics, this is really the DNA of the whole approach. It's scientific, which means treatments are tested and based on evidence, not just theories. It's focused on today's problems. And you, the client, are an active partner in this. You're doing the work. And here's the really interesting part. It says you can get better without necessarily figuring out the deep underlying why. The goal is change, and the path to get there is custom-built for you. To figure out a problem, a behavior therapist kind of becomes a detective. And their number one tool is a really simple but incredibly powerful framework called the ABC model. First up, we've got A for antecedent. Think of this as the trigger. Let's stick with that fear of public speaking. The antecedent is that moment your boss walks over and says, "Hey, you're going to lead the big presentation on Friday." Boom, that's the cue that kicks the whole thing off. That leads us right to B for behavior. This is what you actually do when the trigger happens. In our public speaking example, the behavior might be that your heart starts pounding, your voice gets shaky, you start avoiding eye contact, or maybe you just call in sick on Friday to get out of it completely. And that brings us to the final, crucial piece of the puzzle, C for consequence. This is what happens right after the behavior. If you call in sick, what's the immediate consequence? Relief, right? All that anxiety just vanishes. And that feeling of relief, well, that's a super powerful reward. It basically teaches your brain, hey, avoiding this works. And that's how the cycle keeps going. The ABCs lay it all out perfectly. Okay, so once the therapist has the ABCs mapped out, what's next? What do they actually do about it? This is where we get into the therapist's toolkit, all the cool evidence-based strategies they use to teach new ways of behaving. A real classic technique is called systematic desensitization. The best way to think about it is like climbing a ladder of fear, step by step. First, you learn how to get your body into a state of deep, peaceful relaxation. Then, you make a list, a hierarchy of your fears, from things that are just a tiny bit scary all the way up to the most terrifying thing. While you're completely relaxed, you start by just imagining the very first, least scary thing on the ladder. Once you can do that without feeling anxious, you move up to the next rung, and then the next, until you've climbed the whole ladder and the fear just doesn't have power over you anymore. Now, this idea of exposure can happen in a couple of ways. Systematic desensitization, like we just talked about, often uses your imagination. But another really powerful method is called in vivo exposure. In vivo just means in real life. So instead of imagining, you face the actual situations, but again, in a very gradual, controlled, and safe way. It's the difference between picturing yourself giving the speech and actually practicing it in front of a friend you trust. And the toolkit is huge. It's not just for phobias. For someone who struggles with social anxiety, for instance, a therapist might use social skills training. It's another super practical method where you learn, you practice, and you get feedback to break down tricky social situations into steps you can actually manage. But here's the thing. Behavior therapy isn't stuck in the 1950s. Not at all. It's a field that's always evolving, and some of the most exciting new developments have happened in just the last few decades. This timeline really shows you the whole story. The first wave back in the day was pure behaviorism, all about rewards and punishments. Then the second wave came along and said, hey, wait a minute, our thoughts are important too. But now we're in the third wave, which is so cool because it integrates ancient ideas like mindfulness and acceptance into the mix. And these third wave therapies have given us some amazing tools. You've got things like dialectical behavior therapy, or DBT, which is brilliant for helping people manage really intense emotions. And then there's acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, which teaches you to, well, accept difficult thoughts and feelings instead of fighting them, so you can focus your energy on living a life you value. It's a beautiful blend of old and new. So after all that, the concepts, the ABCs, the toolkit, let's bring it all home. Why does behavior therapy still matter so much? Why is it such a go-to approach for so many different problems? Well, like anything, it's got its pros and cons. On the plus side, its strengths are huge. It's backed by science, it's action-oriented, and it gives you concrete skills. The criticisms are also worth thinking about, though. Some people argue that it might change what you do, but not how you deeply feel, or that it just treats the symptom without getting to the root cause. But for a behaviorist, hey, the symptom is the problem we need to solve. This quote from all the way back in 1967 just nails the entire philosophy. It's not about finding one magic bullet that works for everyone. It's about a careful, scientific, and totally personalized process to figure out what's going to work best for this person with this problem right here, right now. And that really leaves us with one last thought to chew on. If our actions are learned, that means they can be unlearned. So think about your own life for a minute. Your habits, your fears, those automatic reactions you have. If you could pick just one, what's one behavior you would choose to change? It's a pretty powerful question when you think about it.
All right, today we are pulling back the curtain on one of the most practical and, honestly, revolutionary approaches to mental health out there. Cognitive behavior therapy, or as most people call it, CBT. We're going to dig into a really powerful idea. What if the secret to a better life isn't about changing what happens to you, but about changing how you think about what happens to you?
You know the feeling, right? That little voice in your head that just loves to replay your mistakes on a loop. Or maybe it's the one that's constantly worrying about a future that hasn't even happened. It can be absolutely exhausting. Well, CBT is all about learning how to talk back to that voice, to get to the very root of that nagging inner critic.
So, let's kick things off with our first big idea, the thought trap. Seriously, this is the core concept. If you get this one thing, everything else about CBT just clicks into place.
Now get this, because this is the whole game right here. CBT says that it's not the bad grade, the awkward first date, or the job rejection that actually makes us feel awful. Nope. It's the story we tell ourselves about it. Think about it. Two people get the exact same criticism at work. One person shrugs it off, the other's crushed for a week. The event was the same. The only thing that was different was their belief about what that event meant.
And this idea is perfectly captured in what psychologist Albert Ellis called the ABC framework. It's super simple. A is the activating event. Let's say you get an email from your boss that just says, "We need to talk." C is the consequence. Your stomach drops, you feel instant panic. Now, we all think that A causes C, right? But Ellis pointed out this hidden middle step, B, for belief. The thought, "Oh no, I'm getting fired," is what's really causing the panic, not the email itself. That B is the secret ingredient.
Another pioneer, Aaron Beck, had a great name for these faulty beliefs. He called them cognitive distortions. I love that. It's like they're bugs in our mental software. For example, there's all or nothing thinking. If I don't ace this presentation, I'm a complete failure. Sound familiar? Or what about personalization?
You know when your friend is quiet at dinner and you immediately think, I must have done something to upset them. Learning to spot these bugs is the first step to running a system update on your brain. So who were the geniuses who figured all this stuff out? Let's take a quick look at the key players who built this whole school of thought from the ground up. So you've got these three heavy hitters, and they each had a slightly different style. Albert Ellis, he was like a sharp, logical debater. He'd directly challenge your irrational thoughts. Then you had Aaron Beck, who was more like a friendly scientist. He'd partner with you to gather evidence and test your negative thoughts like hypotheses. And then Donald Meichenbaum came along and was like your personal inner speech coach, helping you change the actual words you say to yourself. So it kind of evolved from debating to investigating to coaching. Pretty cool, right?
And this quote from Ellis just hits the nail on the head. He's basically saying that we walk around with this secret rule book in our heads full of musts and shoulds. Things like, I must be liked by everyone, or things should be fair. The problem is, life doesn't care about our rule book. So these rigid demands just set us up for disappointment over and over again.
Okay, so we've met the brains behind the operation. Now for the really fun part. How do we actually use these ideas to rewrite our own inner scripts? Let's get into the tools. Remember the ABC model? Well, Ellis gave it a crucial upgrade. He added D and E. D stands for dispute. This is where the magic happens. It's where you put your belief on trial. You ask tough questions. Is this thought really 100% true? Where's the proof? Is there another way to look at this? And when you successfully dispute that faulty belief, you arrive at E, an effective new belief. And a new belief, well, that leads to a whole new, much healthier consequence.
And check this out. This is a perfect before and after. The first thought is so heavy, so absolute. I must do well or else I'm no good. Your entire self-worth is on the line. But look at the after. It's lighter. It's more flexible. I'd prefer to do well. It's just a preference, not a life or death command. Can you feel the difference? Just changing that one word from must to prefer takes an enormous amount of pressure off. That simple switch is a game changer.
All right, enough theory. Let's see how this all plays out in the real world with a real person. We're going to take a look at the classic case study of a client named Stan. So meet Stan. Stan's got some stuff going on. He's terrified of failing, he feels really awkward and intimidated around women, and it's all fueled by this deep core belief that just plays on repeat, I'm not much of a man. That single thought acts like a filter, coloring every single thing he experiences and making him feel totally inadequate. So how does a therapist help him? Well, they don't just say, Stan, you're wrong. Instead, they become a team. First, they might spot that Stan is stuck in what Beck called the cognitive triad, a nasty loop of thinking negatively about himself, the world, and the future. Then, using something called Socratic questioning, the therapist asks gentle questions to help Stan discover the holes in his own logic. And then comes the best part, homework. They design little real-world experiments, like maybe just saying hello to one person, to go out and collect actual data to see if his belief that everyone will reject me is actually true.
Now, here's a really important question. This approach seems very logical, very individualistic. So, is it a one-size-fits-all solution? Does it work for everyone, from every background all around the world?
And the answer is nuanced. On the one hand, CBT's structured, problem-solving vibe is a huge plus for lots of people. But on the other hand, you have to be careful. For example, a super direct, confrontational style might not land well in a culture that prizes harmony. And even more importantly, you have to understand cultural values. The belief, I must always put my family first, might look like a distortion from a Western, individualistic perspective. But in a collectivist culture, that's not a bug in the software, it's a core feature.
But when you boil it all down, the takeaway from CBT is incredibly hopeful. It's this: you can't always control the world around you, but you have way more control than you think over your inner world. It hands the power back to you. By learning to notice your thoughts and question them, you can literally change the way you experience your life. So I'll leave you with this challenge. Just for today, what's one automatic thought that tends to pop into your head? You know the one. Now that you have a few tools, how could you start to question it? Just a little bit. Give it a try. Thanks so much for tuning in.
Have you ever felt like you're just a passenger in your own life? Kind of just reacting to things as they come at you? Well, today we're diving into a really powerful way of thinking that basically puts you back in the driver's seat. It's called Reality Therapy, and it is all about taking back control by understanding why we do what we do. So let's start with a big one, a question I think we've all asked ourselves. Why do we get stuck?
Why do we stay in these feelings of unhappiness or anxiety or frustration, sometimes for years, even when we're desperate to feel better? Well, the story we usually tell ourselves is, I can't help it. We tend to believe that our feelings are things that just happen to us, like I am depressed, I am anxious, as if these emotions are just bad weather that rolls in, and we have absolutely no say in the matter. But, and this is a big but, what if that's not the whole picture? Reality therapy, which was developed by William Glasser, comes along and offers this really radical and honestly super empowering alternative. It completely challenges that idea that we're just passive victims of our own feelings. And this brings us right to the heart of reality therapy, the incredible power of choice. It asks us to make what seems like a small shift in our language, but it's actually a huge shift in our thinking. It's all about turning the nouns of our suffering into active verbs. Now, this is all based on something called choice theory. And the idea is pretty straightforward. Everything we do is a behavior, and almost all of it is chosen. So what's driving these choices? Well, it boils down to 5 basic built-in needs we all have. Survival, of course, love and belonging that need to connect, power, which is really about feeling competent and respected, freedom, having autonomy, and last but not least, fun. Seriously, every single thing we do is our brain's best attempt to satisfy one or more of these needs. And this is where it really clicks. This quote just nails it. Instead of saying you are depressed, choice theory says you are actively depressing. Instead of being angry, you are angering. You see the difference? It's not a state that happens to you, it's an action, a behavior that you are, often unconsciously, choosing. Okay, so you might be thinking, how on earth is a feeling a choice? Great question. It's because our behavior isn't just one thing. It's what the theory calls our total behavior, and it has 4 parts that are all tied together: our acting, our thinking, our feeling, and our physiology, like our heart rate or breathing. They're a package deal. So picture your total behavior like a car. The front wheels are your actions and your thoughts. You have direct control over those. You can steer them wherever you want to go. The back wheels, those are your feelings and your physiology. Now, you can't steer the back wheels directly, but they always follow where the front wheels lead. So here's the kicker. If you want to change how you feel, you have to start by changing what you are doing and what you are thinking. Okay, so if we're constantly making choices to meet our needs, what's guiding us? What's the map we're using? Well, that's where this really cool concept called the quality world comes into play. I want you to think of your quality world like a special private photo album you keep in your head. It's filled with pictures of everything that makes you feel good. The people you love being with, the hobbies that light you up, the ideas you believe in. It's basically your personal vision of a perfect life. And everything you do is an attempt to make your real life look more like those pictures. So where does unhappiness come from? It's that frustrating gap between the life we're actually living and the pictures we have in our quality world. And a huge part of reality therapy is helping people get really clear on those pictures and then figure out how to make choices that bring them closer to the people and things that truly make them happy. Now, this all sounds pretty good in theory, right? But how do you actually apply it? Well, reality therapy isn't just a philosophy. It gives you a super practical step-by-step guide. It's an action plan known by the acronym WDEP. The WDEP system is this simple but really effective tool for making a change. It's basically a series of questions. We start with W for wants, move on to D for doing, then E for evaluation, and finish up with P for plan. Let's just quickly break that down. First up, W is for wants. This is where you dig deep and get super clear on those pictures in your quality world. A therapist might ask something just like this to help you paint a vivid picture of what you truly want, not what you think you're supposed to want. Next is D for doing. This is just a reality check. No judgment, no shame, just a straightforward look in the mirror at your actual behavior. What are you spending your time and energy on right now in your effort to get what you want? Then comes E for evaluation. And let me tell you, this is the absolute heart of the whole process. It's the question that connects your actions to your desires. It's so simple, but so profound. Is what you're currently doing actually working? Is it getting you closer to what you want? We're not talking right or wrong here, just is it effective? And all of this leads us to P, the plan. Because if the honest answer to that last question is no, then it's time to chart a new course. The final step is to make a simple, doable, concrete plan to try something different, to start steering those front wheels in a new, more effective direction.
Okay, this all sounds really empowering, doesn't it? But we have to ask, does this highly personal, choice-focused approach work for everybody, in every single situation? It's really important to take a balanced look at it.
On the one hand, the strengths are pretty obvious. It's incredibly empowering, it's action-oriented, and it's based on needs we all share as humans. But, on the other hand, critics argue that by focusing so much on individual choice, it can sometimes overlook very real systemic problems, like poverty or discrimination. It also doesn't focus much on the unconscious mind, and its very direct style might not be the best fit for cultures that prefer a more indirect way of communicating. So, after diving into the theory and the practical steps, what's the big takeaway here? When you click away from this, what's the key thing to remember about reality therapy and your own next move? All right, let's boil it all down. First, you are responsible for your total behavior, period. Because of that, the key is to focus on what you can actually steer, your actions and your thoughts. And always remember, every behavior, even the ones that seem destructive, is your best shot at that moment to get a fundamental need met. Which brings us to the most important question of all, is what I'm doing working for me? When it comes right down to it, this is the core promise of reality therapy. When you shift your mindset to focus on responsibility and choice, when you truly get that you're the one steering the car, you can go from feeling powerless to feeling a deep, genuine sense of empowerment and control over your own life. And that really brings us to the end. But in the spirit of everything we've talked about, this isn't so much an ending as it is a starting line, a choice point. So I'll just leave you with the only question that really matters. What will you choose to do next?
Okay, let's dive into a therapeutic approach that asks a pretty radical question. What if the problems you're facing, what if they aren't just in you, but are actually a reflection of the world around you? That's really the core idea of what's called feminist therapy. It's all about looking beyond just one person to see the social, the cultural, and yeah, even the political forces that shape our lives.
So have you ever been there? When you're facing a tough time, do you ever just stop and ask yourself, is the problem just me? I think it's a question so many of us ask. You know, when we feel anxious or depressed or just plain stuck, it's so natural to turn that magnifying glass inward and think, I'm the one who's flawed, I'm broken. But what we're talking about today, feminist therapy, it suggests that's not the whole picture, not even close. It dares to ask, what if the problem isn't just you?
In that question right there, that's our starting point. So, first up, is the problem just you? We're going to look at how this whole approach totally reframes mental health by challenging where we think our problems are even coming from in the first place. All right, so check this out. This is the fundamental split in perspective. On one hand, you've got the traditional individual view. For a long, long time, psychology has kind of looked at our problems as personal failings, right? Like there's some internal flaw, some pathology inside of us that needs to be fixed. But the social view, the one we're talking about, it just flips that whole idea on its head. It says, hold on a second. It suggests our struggles are actually deeply connected to our environment, the societal messages, the power structures that we're all swimming in every single day. And this is the key, the big takeaway here. Feminist therapy calls for a lens shift. Seriously, think about it like this. You're swapping out a magnifying glass that's just zeroed in on your own personal flaws for, say, a wide-angle lens that can see the whole big picture, the entire environment. It's such a powerful move away from self-blame or even blaming the victim, and it takes us toward a much more complete and, honestly, a much more compassionate way of understanding ourselves.
Okay, so what's actually behind this radically different lens? Let's get into the core principles. We're going to break down what makes this approach to well-being so unique.
First up, and this is the absolute cornerstone of the whole thing, the personal is political. Now hold on, this doesn't mean your therapy session turns into some kind of cable news debate. Not at all. What it really means is that your personal experiences, things like feeling inadequate at your job, or struggling with body image, or feeling like you can't speak up in your relationships, those very personal things are often symptoms of much broader social and political issues. We're talking about things like sexism, racism, or economic inequality that create the environment we live in.
And that leads us to another really powerful idea, viewing our problems as survival. So, instead of seeing symptoms like anxiety or maybe being a chronic people pleaser as signs of a disorder, This approach reframes them as totally logical coping mechanisms. They become survival strategies. Actually, you could even say they're brilliant ways a person has adapted to navigate a world that can be unjust or oppressive. And let me tell you, that shift from seeing pathology to seeing survival, that is incredibly empowering.
So if you're going to see problems differently, it makes sense that you need a different kind of relationship in therapy, right? This next part is all about therapy as a partnership. It's a move away from the expert fixing the patient and toward building something truly egalitarian.
Yeah, think about it. So many traditional therapy models are pretty hierarchical. You've got the therapist up here as the expert, holding all the knowledge. Well, feminist therapy actively works to just dismantle that hierarchy. It says the relationship has to be egalitarian, built on a foundation of mutual trust, respect, and true collaboration. The whole point is to empower you, the client, not to make you dependent on the therapist.
And this is the principle that makes that whole partnership thing actually work. It's simple, but it's profound. The client is the expert on their own life. That's you. Your experiences, your feelings, your intuition, they are seen as the most valid, the most authoritative sources of knowledge in the room. The therapist isn't there to hand you the answers. Their job is to help you connect with the expertise you already have.
Okay, so we've got the big ideas and we understand the relationship. But what does this actually look like in a session? What do you do? Let's get into the practical side of things, the new tools that lead to new power. One of the absolute hallmark techniques is something called gender role analysis, and it's a really powerful three-step process. First, you and your therapist just identify the tons and tons of messages you've gotten your whole life about gender. Then you analyze them. You talk about how those messages and expectations have really impacted your well-being. And finally, and this is the best part, you get to consciously decide which of those messages you want to keep and which ones you're ready to throw out. It's all about taking back the pen and writing your own story.
And that's not the only tool in the toolbox, of course. There are other key techniques, too. There's power analysis, which helps you see where the power is in your relationships and in society. You've got assertiveness training. That's a classic, right? Learning to say what you need clearly and respectfully. There's even something called bibliotherapy, which is really just a fancy way of saying the therapist might suggest some books that could give you a new perspective. And then there's reframing and relabeling, which leads us to this next great example.
This is such a perfect example of that relabeling idea. Think about it. Instead of seeing her actions as selfish, a client learned to relabel them as self-caring. That's huge. So often, society teaches women especially that taking care of your own needs is selfish. But by consciously changing that one word, you completely change the emotional meaning. It's not just semantics. It's about reclaiming your fundamental right to take care of yourself.
But here's where this approach gets even bigger. The work doesn't just stop with you. The final piece of the puzzle is what really sets feminist therapy apart. It's all about healing the world, not just yourself. It's about taking that personal healing and pushing it outward.
Because really, the ultimate goal here is change, not just adjustment. A lot of therapy is about helping you adjust to the world as it is. Feminist therapy says, no, the goal is to empower you to become an agent of change in that world. It operates on this deep understanding that your individual healing is totally interconnected with the health of your community and society as a whole.
And what does that social action look like? Well, it can take so many forms out in the real world. As a person feels more empowered, they might get inspired. Maybe that means volunteering at a rape crisis center or lobbying lawmakers for better policies. It could be community organizing or even just educating the people in your life. The core idea is beautiful. You take the strength from your personal healing, and you use that new energy to help fix the very systems that might have caused the harm in the first place.
So, to wrap it all up, feminist therapy offers this really profound shift in perspective. It's a move away from blaming the individual and toward understanding the whole context. It invites every one of us to see our struggles not as personal failures, but maybe, just maybe, as perfectly normal responses to a very complex world. And that leaves us with one final question to think about. What part of your world could use a lens shift?
Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're jumping into the really fascinating world of postmodern therapy. It's a collection of ideas that pretty much turned the whole conversation about mental health, our problems, and even healing completely on its head. So let's just start with a question that gets right to the core of everything we're going to talk about today. Is a problem something that is in you, a part of who you are, or is it just something that is with you? The answer, at least according to these postmodern approaches, could honestly change everything. You know, for the longest time, therapy was all about digging around in your past, trying to find the root cause of what was wrong. And the therapist, they were the expert with all the answers. Well, postmodern therapy comes along and just flips that entire script. It shifts the focus away from dissecting old problems and points it squarely towards future possibilities. And this slide right here really breaks down that huge difference. Traditional therapy often zooms in on pathology, what's wrong with you, and puts the therapist in the driver's seat to fix it. But postmodern approaches, they do the opposite. They look for your strengths. They operate on the radical idea that you are the expert on your own life. And maybe, just maybe, there isn't one single truth, but lots of different realities that we all create for ourselves. In a word, it's all about empowerment. Okay, so to really wrap our heads around this, we have to look at the philosophical engine that's driving all of these therapies. And that big idea is something called social constructionism. Basically, social constructionism says that our reality is something we build, not something we just find. I mean, think about money. A $20 bill is just a piece of paper, right? But through our shared agreements and the stories we tell, we've constructed it to have real value. Well, the way we understand ourselves works a lot like that. It's built through our conversations, our culture, our language, and that means there's no single right way to see the world. We're all co-creating our own meaning all the time. And this idea right here, this is probably the most revolutionary part of the whole framework. It comes from therapists Harleen Anderson and Harold Gulishian. I mean, think about it. If our realities are all personally and culturally built, then who could possibly know your reality better than you? This is also a huge reason why these approaches work so well from a multicultural perspective. They don't push one single version of what's healthy, they actually honor the client's unique lived experience. So what does this all mean? It means you should think of your life less like a fixed biography that's already been written and more like a story that you are actively writing right now. And if you're the author, well, that means you've got the power to edit, to revise, and to start a brand new chapter whenever you want. This is a huge idea, and it's central to the two main therapies we're going to look at next. So, how does this philosophy actually work in practice? Well, our first stop is solution-focused brief therapy, or SFBT for short. And honestly, the name tells you almost everything you need to know. It's designed to be brief, and it focuses on solutions, not problems. SFBT runs on a few simple but incredibly powerful beliefs. First, that looking toward a positive future is way more helpful than digging up a negative past. It also insists that exceptions to every problem always exist. You know, those times when the problem wasn't so bad, or maybe wasn't there at all. The whole philosophy is super pragmatic. Figure out what works, even a little bit, and then just do more of it. The idea is that these small, positive changes can create a ripple effect that leads to really big shifts. Now, one of the most famous tools to come out of SFBT is the miracle question. And yeah, it might sound a little weird at first, but a therapist asks this to get you to stop obsessing over the problem and start painting a really vivid picture of the solution. By describing what your life would look like without the problem, you're not just daydreaming, you're actually creating a concrete blueprint for change. All right, our second major approach is narrative therapy. Now, if SFBT is about finding the solutions and exceptions that already exist in your life, narrative therapy is about actively rewriting the problem-saturated stories that can sometimes take over our identities. This right here is the single most important idea in all of narrative therapy. It's a huge departure from thinking of someone as, say, an anxious person. Instead of making the problem a part of your identity, narrative therapy suggests a completely different way of looking at it. The problem is its own thing. It's a separate entity, something outside of you that you have a relationship with. This seems like such a simple shift in language, but it's so profound, and it opens up a whole new world of possibilities. And this technique has a name. It's called externalization. By talking about the anxiety, or the guilt, or the anger, as something separate, you can start to see how it operates, when it tries to take control, and this is the crucial part, when you have more power over it. You're no longer the victim of your problem, you're an active agent in a struggle against it. Okay, so this all sounds really great in theory, right? But what does it actually look like in a real therapy session? Let's take a look at the case of Stan, a client who comes in with some pretty common struggles. So Stan comes to therapy pretty convinced that he is the problem. His whole identity is wrapped up in his low self-esteem, his fears, and his regrets.
A narrative therapist would look at this and call it a problem-saturated story. So what does a postmodern therapist do? Well, first, they collaborate. The therapist isn't the boss. Stan is the expert. Then they externalize. They start talking about low self-esteem as a thing separate from Stan. Next, using a solution-focused trick, they hunt for exceptions. Stan, tell me about a time when this low self-esteem didn't have so much say in what you did. And through that process, Stan starts to uncover a totally different story, one where he actually has courage and determination. He begins to build a new narrative, one based on his strengths. And all of this really brings us to the core message, the ultimate takeaway here. Now, look, these approaches aren't some magic cure-all. Some critics rightly point out that focusing only on the story can sometimes ignore bigger systemic issues. But the central idea is still absolutely revolutionary. If our lives are stories, then we have a much bigger role in writing them than we usually believe. The bottom line is this: your past does not have to dictate your future. The stories you tell yourself about who you are, what you can and can't do, and what's possible for you, they are not carved in stone. They're just first drafts. And you're the one holding the pen. So I'll just leave you with this to think about. What's one dominant problem story that you tend to tell about yourself? And can you find just one single exception, one moment in time that proves that story isn't the whole truth? Because finding that one little exception, that just might be the start of a whole new chapter. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Welcome to The Explainer. You know, we all had these patterns, right? Things we do that we just can't seem to shake, especially when it comes to our families. And we almost always think the problem is just us. But what if the answer isn't locked away inside you? What if it's actually in the invisible web of relationships that surrounds you? Today, we are diving into an idea that completely flips the script on how we look at our personal struggles. Just think about it for a second. When someone is struggling, maybe with anxiety that just hums in the background all day, or relying on a drink to unwind, our first instinct is to look inward. The mission becomes, I need to fix myself. The spotlight is aimed squarely at the individual. But is that really the whole story? And that leads us to a really powerful question. When one person in a family is clearly hurting, who is actually the patient? Is it just that one person? Or is something much, much bigger going on? To really get our heads around that question, let's meet Stan. Now, when Stan first went to therapy, he was absolutely certain that he was the patient. His problems felt deeply personal, like a laundry list of things that were just broken inside of him. And you can just hear the self-blame in his voice, can't you? He sees this very straight line from his internal world, that loneliness and fear, directly to his actions. And on the surface, this looks like a pretty open and shut case of one guy trying to numb his own pain. And the list, well, it goes on. He's got this crushing anxiety, major trouble in his relationships, and this deep nagging guilt that he's somehow wasted his life. Now, the traditional approach would be to just tackle these one by one, right? Treat the anxiety, address the drinking. But what if those are just the tips of a much, much larger iceberg? Okay, and this is where the whole story takes a sharp turn. Because what if Stan isn't the problem? What if he is a symptom? That single question is the absolute foundation of an approach that zooms way out from the individual to see the entire family as one single interconnected system. And this is the heart of family systems therapy. It basically argues that you can't truly understand a single person without understanding the emotional environment they live in. So the real patient isn't the individual, it's the family's whole emotional ecosystem. All the unspoken rules, the history, and that web of relationships that holds everybody in place. A really great way to picture this is to think of one of those mobiles hanging over a baby's crib. If you just gently touch one little dangling part, the entire structure shifts and moves, right? No single piece just hangs there all by itself. Well, families work the exact same way. One person's stress or their joy or their behavior sends ripples through everyone else. So, okay, if the family is a system, how on earth does a therapist actually see all those invisible patterns? How do you start to map out the emotional forces that have been shaping a family, sometimes for generations? Well, they have this incredible tool called a Genogram. And believe me, this is so much more than a simple family tree. It doesn't just track who's related to who, it tracks emotional legacies. It maps out relationships, major life events, and, this is the key, repeating patterns that flow down through the generations.
It makes the invisible totally visible. And when we map out Stan's family, the picture just snaps into focus. It's almost alarming. His individual problem is suddenly everywhere. Just look at this. His father is a recovering alcoholic. His mother lives with this deep-seated suspicion of drinking. Even his brother-in-law struggles with it. All of a sudden, Stan isn't an outlier at all. He's part of a much bigger pattern. The Genogram just lays out this powerful multi-generational story. Stan's drinking isn't just his issue, it's a family issue. In system speak, he's become the identified patient. He's the one carrying the symptoms for the entire family. His behavior, as painful as it is actually serving a purpose. It's an expression of a system that's deeply out of balance. So, with this new map in hand, the goal of therapy shifts completely. It is no longer about fixing Stan. It's about changing the very steps of the family dance that keeps everyone locked in these predictable and often painful roles. So, in a therapy session, Stan's father says what a lot of us would probably think. He focuses right on Stan's behavior as the one and only problem. He singles him out, saying he just needs to stop. This is a perfect example of that individual blame perspective. But now watch what the therapist does here. It is so clever. There's no argument, no defending Stan. Instead, they use a crucial technique called reframing. They take the father's criticism and they translate it into an expression of care, shifting the focus from blame to a shared hope. It connects them instead of dividing them. It's brilliant. And ultimately, family systems thinking isn't just a model for therapy, it's a completely new lens for looking at human behavior. It asks us to stop looking for a simple cause and effect and instead see the complex, interconnected dance that really explains why we all do the things we do. This is the fundamental shift in focus. The old model asks, who's to blame, and points a finger. The systems model asks, what's the pattern here, and draws a map. It stops trying to just treat the symptom, like Stan's drinking, and starts trying to change the underlying dynamic that makes the symptom necessary in the first place. The problem isn't the person, it's the space between the people. And this is the most powerful insight of all, because this isn't just for therapists. This lens is a tool you can use to understand the dynamics in your office, in your friend group, in your community. It empowers you to stop blaming individuals, including yourself, and start seeing the invisible scripts and unwritten rules that guide how we all interact every single day. So, we'll leave you with this question to chew on. Every single one of us comes from a family system with its own history and its own unique set of unwritten rules. So, what are the invisible rules that might be guiding your life? Because the moment you can finally see the system, you gain the power to choose a new role within it. Hello and welcome. Today we're diving into a really powerful idea that's changing the face of mental health. What if the very best therapy for you isn't just one single approach, but a smart, thoughtful combination of many? Let's get right into it. So if you've ever even thought about looking for a therapist, you've probably hit this wall. You start looking around and wow, the number of different approaches is just dizzying, right? It almost feels like you need to be an expert yourself just to figure out where to even begin. And what a list it is. I mean, you've got therapies that want to explore your deep, unconscious past. Others focus on your goals and your place in the world. Some get really philosophical about the meaning of life itself. And then you have these super practical approaches that are all about changing what you do and how you think, right here and now. Each one offers a totally different perspective, but honestly, how on earth are you supposed to know which one is the one for you? And that really gets to the heart of the matter. For a long, long time, the world of therapy was made up of all these separate, competing schools of thought. But all that confusion, plus a whole lot of research into what actually helps people get better, has sparked this incredible idea that is totally reshaping the field. That big idea is the engine behind something called the psychotherapy integration movement. It's a direct answer to that confusing menu we were just looking at, and it's all about finding a smarter, more flexible, and honestly, more effective way to help people. So what is it exactly? Well, at its core, it's a philosophy that frees therapists from having to stick to just one single rulebook. The idea is so simple, but it's also revolutionary. Instead of being a specialist who only knows how to use, say, a hammer, why not be a master craftsperson with an entire workshop full of tools? And listen, This isn't just some abstract theory for academics to debate. The whole point here is incredibly practical. It's about making therapy work better for more people with the real-world problems they're facing. It's all about boosting its efficiency and making it applicable to, well, all of us. Okay, so how does this actually look in a therapy session? In practice. I think the best way to get your head around it is with a really simple analogy. It's all about building a better toolbox. So on the one hand, you have the old school model, where the theory is king. The whole process is basically about trying to make the client fit into that one specific theoretical box. But the integrative approach, it flips that script completely. The focus is 100% on you, the client. And the process is all about tailoring the therapy to you, pulling from that big, diverse toolbox of techniques to find what's going to work best. Now, therapists who work this way usually take one of two main roads. The first is what's known as the common factors approach. This is all about zeroing in on the essential ingredients that research shows make any therapy work, no matter the brand name. The second road is technical integration, and yep, that's our toolbox approach. It's where a therapist skillfully selects the very best techniques from different models for the specific problem you're working on. And when we talk about those common factors, there is one that stands head and shoulders above the rest. The research is just overwhelming on this. A strong, trusting, and supportive relationship with your therapist. It isn't just a nice little bonus. It is the single most critical part of effective therapy. It's the foundation everything else is built on. Okay, so let's get really practical. How does a therapist actually use this toolbox to help a real person with real problems? A fantastic integrative framework looks at 3 key parts of our experience: how we think, how we feel, and what we do. And this is where it all comes together. Just imagine someone is struggling with perfectionism, this idea that I must be perfect. For the thinking part of that problem, a therapist might pull a tool from cognitive therapy to challenge that belief. Then, for the deep down feelings of hurt that might be driving that perfectionism, they could use a completely different tool from Gestalt Therapy, maybe something like role-playing. And for the doing part, like avoiding social events for fear of failing, they might use a classic behavior therapy tool, like a practical homework assignment. See? It's one person, but a whole set of different tools for the different layers of the problem. So, what's the bottom line here? What does all of this mean for you, or for anyone who's looking for help? It means we are finally moving towards a world where therapy can be truly and beautifully tailored to you. The takeaway from all this is just incredibly empowering. It means your therapy gets customized to your specific needs, your personality, your goals. The focus shifts away from what does the theory say to what actually works for this person. It means you're not expected to squeeze yourself into some rigid one-size-fits-all box. You get the benefit of a huge range of proven methods. This quote just nails the whole idea perfectly. The old way of thinking was about stretching the person to fit the theory. The new way, the integrative way, is about tailoring the therapy to fit the person. It's a massive shift from being theory-centered to being truly human-centered. So we'll leave you with this to chew on. If your therapy was designed from the ground up, just for you, what would it look like? What tools would you want in your toolbox? Thanks for joining us for this explainer. Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're going to dive into a really fascinating case study. It's all about seeing how modern therapy isn't some rigid formula, but actually a creative, tailored process. We're going to see how a therapist can blend a bunch of different approaches to help one person work through a pretty complex web of struggles. So let's start with the person at the center of all this, Stan. This one quote from him is just incredibly powerful. It really captures the immense weight he's carrying into therapy. It's this deep, profound sense of guilt and failure that's just coloring his entire view of his life. And when you look at his issues, you see they're not just a random list. They're all tangled up together. It's this web of anxiety and self-doubt where every problem just feeds the next one. He's afraid to try, which makes him feel like a failure. He feels anxious, so he drinks, and that just leads to even more guilt. So the big question is, where do you even start with all this? How does a therapist begin to untangle that knot? Well, the answer isn't as simple as just picking one type of therapy off a shelf. Instead, the therapist here uses what's called an integrative approach. Think of it like a flexible game plan that's actually designed for real-world, messy problems, not something you'd find in a simple textbook. Okay, this definition might look a little academic, but it's so important.
Psychotherapy integration isn't about randomly mixing and matching things. It's a systematic combination of the best tools from different theories. And the goal? It's really simple but profound. You create a therapy that fits the person, instead of trying to force the person to fit into one single rigid theory. So, how does this actually work? Well, the therapist boils it all down to 3 core areas: what Stan is feeling, what he's thinking, and what he's doing. It's a complete system that looks at the whole person, our emotions, our thoughts, and our actions, because they're all connected, right? All right, so let's see how the therapist actually puts this framework into practice. We're going to start by diving into Stan's inner world, his feelings and his thoughts. So here, the therapist is pulling from ideas in Gestalt and Existential Therapy. Instead of just talking about sadness, the therapist guides Stan to actually experience it directly and safely right there in the room. By asking him to focus on that physical feeling in his chest, these buried emotions of sadness and hurt, they get a chance to come to the surface so he can finally deal with them. But of course, feelings are almost always tied to our thoughts. And here you see this amazing combination of techniques from 2 totally different schools, Adlerian and cognitive behavior therapy, to tackle Stan's thinking. The therapist helps him find his private logic, those core self-defeating beliefs he holds, and then one by one helps him challenge them and replace them with thoughts that are way more rational and helpful.
Now, getting these insights, really understanding your feelings and challenging your thoughts, that is incredibly powerful stuff. But as any good therapist will tell you, that's really only half the battle.
This is the million-dollar question in therapy, right? This is the pivot. How do you build that bridge between understanding your problem in the safety of the therapist's office and actually living a different life out there in the real world? And to build that bridge, the therapist uses behavioral techniques. They assign concrete homework. But these aren't just chores. Think of them as real-world experiments. Every single one is designed to let Stan test his old fears and give him a chance to build new, better habits. It's about proving to himself through action that the disasters he's predicting just aren't going to happen. And this really brings us to the whole point of this approach. These different pieces, feeling, thinking, and doing, they don't work in isolation. For real change to actually stick, they have to be woven together into a single, cohesive strategy. And this chart, wow, it just lays it all out perfectly. You can literally see the therapist picking specific tools for specific jobs. For the feeling domain, they're using Gestalt. For thinking, they bring in Adlerian and cognitive ideas. And for doing, they lean on behavior therapy. So the therapist isn't just a cognitive therapist, they're Stan's therapist, using exactly the right tool for the right job at exactly the right time. So yeah, the takeaway is pretty clear. Effective therapy isn't a one-size-fits-all deal. It's a dynamic, collaborative process of discovery. Why? Because human problems are messy. The approach has to be tailored to fit the unique landscape of the person who's asking for help. It's about drawing on this rich history of psychological insights to create something totally new and uniquely helpful for that one individual. In the end, Stan's case just shows that change is absolutely possible, even when you're starting from a place that feels hopeless. It proves that therapy, at its very best, isn't about some magic bullet. It's about creating a personalized path. And that kind of leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? It makes you wonder about your own potential for growth and what that unique path might look like for you.